Hey there, this is Steve Nixon with freejazzlessons.com, and you are listening to the Musicality Podcast.
Ever wondered why some people seem to have a gift for music? Have you ever wished that you could play by ear, sing in tune, improvise and jam? You're in the right place. Time to turn those wishes into reality. Welcome to the Musicality Podcast with your host, Christopher Sutton.
Hi, this is Christopher, founder of Musical You, and welcome to the Musicality Podcast. Today I'm joined by Steve Nixon of freejazzlessons.com, one of, if not the, top website for playing jazz piano. Though actually it covers some non-jazz material too, and if you're thinking that jazz means advanced, this episode is going to set you straight. Although Steve specialises in piano, pretty much everything we talk about today applies across all instruments, and most of it is highly relevant outside of jazz too. So whatever instrument and genre you play, I know you're going to get a lot from this conversation. Steve has an impressive background as a musician and a music educator. After graduating from Berklee College of Music, he played over 1,800 gigs as a professional pianist in over 17 countries around the world, performing with Grammy Award-winning artists such as Koko and Buddy Guy. He's taught over 14,000 piano lessons, and he created freejazzlessons.com, the largest jazz piano education website in the world, which reaches over 60,000 students every month. In this conversation, we talk about Steve's opinion on the importance of musical talent versus hard work, and how much each has contributed to his own enormous success. We talk about his philosophy on improvising, and he shares a cool trick for how you can make your improvisation sound more interesting, even with just a single scale over a single chord. We also talk about the importance of rhythm skills, and he gives 3 great tips for how to develop your own sense of rhythm. And if you're starting to think about getting called on to play Christmas music this time of year, you won't want to miss what Steve shares about making the same old Christmas tunes feel fresh and exciting for your audience. My name is Christopher Sutton, and this is the Musicality Podcast from Musical You. Welcome to the show, Steve. Thank you for joining us today.
Chris, it is absolutely a pleasure to be here with the audience and the fans of the Musicality Podcast.
Can we start a bit at the beginning of your musical journey? What was it like for you first learning music and becoming a pianist?
Yeah, so I played music as a kid, similar to probably a lot of the people who are listening to this, you start exploring an instrument as a young kid. And I didn't really get real serious about music until I was in high school. I actually sang in the choir, and because I thought it was fun, and there was just good social stuff going on. I don't know if it was necessarily because I loved choir music, but it seemed fun, like fun little credit hour in the middle of the day. But as we were going through it, I started getting kind of interested in the sounds we were making. It started getting really fun. And I remember one time I had a teacher, and she tuned a major chord for the very first time, and we really locked in as a choir, and it was an amazing feeling. I never had an experience like that musically before. I said, you know what, I want more of this type of feeling. And I don't know if it was necessarily a conscious decision, but just really having fun in that particular area. I started, playing a little bit more piano around that time. I picked up a couple music theory books. I started hanging out with the other musicians in my high school. I started buying jazz albums, started trying to figure out some of those things that were going on. So, I got more serious as I got in my late teens, and I got to the point where I actually started getting some pretty decent skills together. I ended up going to the Berklee College of Music in Boston and practiced my tail off there, worked really, really, really hard, worked with some great instructors there. And I made a promise to myself when I first started Berklee. I said, I will not work a day job again after this. And I was selling women's shoes before that. I was working at Borders Books and Music. I was working retail. I was delivering pizzas, you name it. I was probably doing a part-time job just to pay bills. But I said, after I graduated Berklee, never again. I'm going to do a full-time career in music. And I worked really hard. And, it paid off. So moved back to Chicago after graduating Berklee, started gigging 3 to 5 nights a week, pretty much right away at my first week in town, and continued to work hard. and kept pushing the envelope, practicing, trying to get new gigs, really putting my name and my face out there. Started getting some nice touring gigs, and the rest is history. I've had a really phenomenal music career. I'm really humbled by that. 15 years as a full-time professional as of today.
Fantastic. Well, certainly congratulations on your success. And to hear you tell it like that, it sounds like a very smooth and straight line journey. Were there any moments along the way where you maybe had doubt about whether you had what it took to pursue that career?
Absolutely. I just summed it up in like 2 minutes or however long that took us to do that. But there's always, it's a jagged journey. There's plateaus along the way. There's, oh man, I totally screwed up in that jam session. Oh God, I didn't know that many wrong notes existed in music, period. Like you have these moments that maybe don't go that well, but you learn from them. And then the next jam session that happens, you hit less wrong notes. And then, oh, wait a second, I'm actually playing okay here. And then you start building off of there. So, there's always little pitfalls and little, I hate to use the term failures, but just for lack of better terms, little bumps along the way that you learn from and that you progress from there. So it's not a straight line at all, but it is consistent. That is actually where the straight line is, consistently work on your craft.
So that's a really interesting point. And you've mentioned hard work a few times there. I think someone listening to that story, of a musician who started early, went to Berklee and excelled there, and then was an internationally touring musician, would think, oh, they must be really talented. What would you say in terms of how much it was talent versus hard work for you?
Yeah, that's a brilliant question. And one of my favorite questions, by the way, because I deal with this question quite a bit inside our courses and in our Jazz Inner Circle program as well. Students are always asking me, well, yeah, if I went to Berklee like you, or if I did this, or if I was born doing that. But I'm going to be honest with you, the separation between my talent, whatever that is, and my hard work, I don't even know what that is. Okay. So I have consistently practiced all my life. Cool. Maybe I was a little bit more drawn towards music. Maybe my ear was slightly natural, but great. That gets you, as my dad will say, a slightly good ear in the beginning plus a cup of coffee pretty much leaves you with just a cup of coffee. So there isn't really anything you can do with that particular skill. You have to have really focused directional activity towards really getting something specific together that you can do with music. So I don't think there's any separation. I don't know where one begins or one ends, especially if you're being progressive as a musician and you're trying to work on something very specific musically. You need to practice.
Awesome. I think that's terrific to hear from such a successful jazz musician in particular, because I think maybe jazz, more than other genres, people assume requires a gift or a talent or, preternatural abilities by ear. And so it's wonderful to hear that for you, talent may be a part of the mix, but it's certainly not a prerequisite for success in jazz.
No, as a matter of fact, I've worked with a lot of students over the years who do not have what many people would call traditional natural talent. They weren't, born and then all of a sudden 15 seconds later they can play Mozart in all 12 keys. That's just not how it works. But they're intentional with the practice. They're organized. They listen to the advice of people, their instructors and the courses they buy, people who've been there before. They do the work, and then all of a sudden, what's that old saying? I'm an overnight success, 15 years in the making. So you can do great things with music and really unlock what we would call natural talent through your hard work. Everybody has a voice and a passion and a way that they can communicate. Everybody has something to say at their instrument. You just have to get the technical skills to let it out.
So it sounds like for you, jazz was a passion from the beginning. And I think that's really interesting because a lot of musicians feel a bit intimidated by jazz, and they think maybe, it takes 5 years of learning before you're ready to start learning jazz because it's a more advanced genre than other styles like pop and rock. How much truth do you think there is to that, and what advice would you maybe have for someone who's in that position of wanting to learn jazz but worrying that they're not good enough yet to begin?
So first of all, I totally disagree that you can't learn jazz at an early stage. The only thing you want to do is you just want to make sure that you're getting trained in the right way from the beginning. If you try doing it entirely by yourself, yes, it may take you 5 years to just get there. But like working with a program, working with a great teacher, there's so many great educational opportunities available today. Having someone map out a simple plan for you to say, okay, listen, there are certain things you need to have in place in order to sound fairly decent. And I'm not talking about that you're Oscar Peterson or Charlie Parker or John Coltrane in 1 year. That takes some time maybe to get to that virtuosic level, but to be able to like play some songs, know some chords, sound good, have fun, progress in the art form, impress a few people if you wanted to, right? Do something with music, that can be accomplished fairly quickly, but it comes down to having the right tools and education.
And on that note, you're very modest to not self-promote there, but I know you do have a beginner's jazz course available on freejazzlessons.com. Can you give us a glimpse of what kind of stuff you cover there and what for you would be those major things that a teacher should be guiding you through?
Yeah, so the name of the program is actually the Zero to Jazz Piano Hero course, and you can take a look at that. You can get it at freejazzlessons.com/beginner. And we designed that course because we knew there was, just like you were asking me, there were certain things that every player needs to know in order to play this style of music. And essentially what it is, it's teaching you from beginning, like, hey, I know the names of the notes on the piano. Okay, so pretty much, what is that, like maybe lesson number 2, like really beginner step to being able to play songs you love in only 30, 60 days. So we teach people all the chords they need to know, how to practice, chord progressions, how to wiggle their fingers in time, right? Make sure they're having fun along the way. Actually, we teach you how to transpose as well. So if you ever had a problem where, you say, great, I can nail this in the key of C, or I'm a prince in the key of C, but I'm a pauper in the key of D flat, just a half step higher. We want to make sure that you don't have that problem. So we teach people how to play things in all the keys and how to practice it. We have jam tracks on there, so you're having fun along the way as well. And the goal of the program is to be able to play every fundamental jazz chord and the most important jazz chord progressions in context of great jazz standards. And we have a step-by-step system to teach you how to do it. It's just not like, here you go, you're in the program, good luck, kid, we'll see you some other time. We have a clear goal and a method to get you to that ending point right there.
I think that's super valuable because I think part of what makes jazz overwhelming and intimidating is this amazing history of jazz musicians and the different eras of jazz and the huge number of standards that, a pro jazz musician is expected to know. And if you don't have that guidance or structured course available, it's really hard to know how to immerse yourself and not how to just drown in all of the music theory and all of the history and all of the expertise that you might one day hope to have.
Yeah, if you start talking to some people, especially if you go on some of these forums, and you read for like 7 hours, you need to know 15,000 tunes in every scale and every key, and you need to know it right now, or don't even try playing this music. And that's crazy, man. That's just, that's nobody gets it together that quickly. It's not needed to do all that stuff. Yeah, maybe over a lifetime, but this is an art form, and there's things you can do, smart, actionable things you can do to get there right away. So, it's intimidating. I think though, if you're good, again, I keep saying this, if you're intentional and you're smart about how you practice, you have the right method, you can make progress with clear, tangible, smaller goals right away and slowly get that stuff together over the course of time, right?
Fantastic. So one huge topic in jazz is obviously improvisation, and any jazz musician is expected to be able to take a solo at some point in a track. There's maybe a debate or a divide among musicians as to whether improvising, particularly in jazz, should be heavily intellectual and based on theory and really understanding the scales and harmony, or whether it's something where you do some ear training or you naturally have an incredible ear and you just kind of pluck the notes by instinct. Where would you say you fall on that spectrum, or what would your opinion be on the relative importance of those two? Okay,
so first of all, man, this is like the most exciting question I've ever had on a podcast because it's near and dear to my heart, because ultimately, with as much stuff as I've done with music, I truly think like at the end of the day, I'm an improviser. Like that is what I am at the piano. It's the thing that most excites me, right? And so really, if you just sort of think about it, okay, let's pretend that none of us know anything about music. We've never played an instrument before. We don't know what a major chord is. We don't know what practice techniques is. We don't know music theory. Like nobody says to the teacher when they first let in, I can't wait to learn my scales in all 12 keys. I have always been fascinated with what a major 7 sharp 5 chord is, right? How do we do a tritone substitution? Nobody is asking these questions. What they really are starting with is they're saying, listen, I love music. It makes me feel really good. I go out to concerts. I see the artists are having fun when they're playing their instrument. I want that feeling too. I want to be closer to the emotional impact of music and all the cool things it can do, right? So if our goal, and we have all started there, we can never forget that as teachers and as artists, if our goal is to enjoy ourselves, get deeper, maybe learn more about spirituality or ourselves, and be able to express ourselves at the instrument, we need certain tools available. So notice, Chris, I started from more of a spiritual, holistic expression standpoint, and this is the ultimate goal. This is the end journey here. But we need certain technical skills in order to get there. So we do feel free at our instrument, right? So it is helpful to know scales. It is helpful to know chords, right? It is helpful to be able to use your ear and understand the pitches. I know you guys do a lot of ear training here, and, to understand scale degrees and be able to hear those differences, right? To be able to hear chord substitutions, right? To be able to play melodies that you are hearing in your head and get them out, the things that are in your heart and in your head, and be able to get them out on your instrument, right? And that's where the technical skill comes into play as well. So, as much theory as you can learn, as much ear training stuff in a disciplined and structured way as you can get, that better. I'm not a fan of saying like, oh, you shouldn't learn anything technical, because the technical stuff has helped me get out what I talked about was that end goal, that expression, and being able to put how I see the world and connect with people through my keys and through my heart, and through my fingers at the instruments.
Awesome. I think that's a really clear and inspiring kind of philosophy of improvisation. I love that.
Thanks. Yeah, it's a again, it's a passion of mine. The more I learn about music from a technical angle, the more I can be me at the piano, if that makes sense. So, for everybody listening to that, don't be afraid of sometimes people are a little bit afraid of, any natural talent that I have. If I learn too much music theory, this will be ironed out. And they find like for example, Paul McCartney, he calls a major 7th chord the pretty chord, right? And so he doesn't know technically a lot of music theory. So a lot of times people will point to Paul McCartney or the exception to the rule, and they say, well, Paul McCartney didn't know this. I don't need to do this. But, here's the thing. Paul may not have known technical musical theory, but he had done an incredible amount of organization in his own mind in terms of how the music worked. He may have used different words, but it is organized in his mind. He does have a theory component, just not necessarily traditional way. And again, he's the exception to the rule when you have people like that. Most great artists are trained. They have had lessons. They've studied music. They've gone and worked on specific musical elements.
Absolutely. Yeah, I 100% agree with that. So you were recently a guest on the Learn Jazz Standards podcast, and I loved listening in on your conversation with Brent there.
Shout out to Brent.
One thing that really stood out to me in that conversation was your emphasis on rhythm as a skill that a lot of musicians need to develop and is often the biggest weak point. I'd love if you could just share a bit what you think about the importance of rhythm and how a musician can go about getting a better sense of rhythm and sense of the groove.
Yeah, so I've got some sad but true stories in relation to the discoveries I made about rhythm. So, like most musicians, when you decide, okay, well, I'm serious. I really want to get a go with this, and I really want to improve my skills. And this is actually, I talked about in high school when I started getting serious. So I got the discipline together, and I started practicing approximately 2 hours a day. And what I was doing was, okay, well, so if you ask most people, even if they don't know anything about music, what's the first thing that you think about? And they say, well, music has scales. And even if they don't know the scales, like this is the first thing. So of course, that was the first thing that I went towards, right? And I played sports as a kid, and I was like, okay, well, and maybe it was the fact that I was a young male as well. I wanted to be able to, wiggle my fingers fast and be impressive with the keys. So I'm like, all right, well, I'm going to practice my scales. I'm going to practice my arpeggios. I'm going to do it in all 12 keys because I heard you're supposed to do that, right? I'm going to practice my churning exercises, right? Which are these technical exercises that we do on piano. I'm going to practice my hand exercises. And I would do like every skill I'd ever heard of in my life, every key, go crazy. So I practiced for like 2 hours, but like an hour and 40 minutes of it was just technical work because this is all I knew. I didn't know any better. And then, my chest is puffing up. I'm like, yeah, I'm really committed and disciplined and practicing music here, right? I'm really good. And I go to my first jam sessions. I know some chords and some scales, and I get my butt kicked, man. Like I didn't have the stuff together that you need. So what do you need when you go to a jam session? Well, you have to be able to lock in with other musicians. You have to be able to play in time. Cool. Great, Steve. Chords, but can you put them together cohesively in a chord progression in time? Can you keep form? Do you understand what really is involved in music? And the answer is, and I can keep going here, but no. I didn't have any of these skills, right? So finally, after a while, after getting your butt kicked, you say, you know what? Maybe I'm not doing this right. Okay. So at that point, I realized, rhythm was incredibly important. There was certain technical things in terms of organizing this stuff and putting it in time. And the more I started getting into jazz and transcribing and talking to players that were better than me, the more I realized that rhythm was a huge part of all this stuff. Okay, great. I know a Mixolydian scale, but can I groove with it? Can I keep people entertained? Can I do something impactful where people are jumping up from their seats in the crowd when I'm, just jamming through one scale? And the answer again on all that was no. But as I started working, I was able to eventually do that. And I told this story on the podcast that you mentioned earlier, but I've been on international tours, and I'm not going to mention the names of the artists specifically, but these are, people who've sold platinum level recordings and been on huge albums, people that your audience would know, and they don't know the notes on their instruments. Okay. They maybe know the blues scale pentatonic box. If there's any guitar players listening to this, right, there's a pattern that all guitar players learn on their instrument. It's a box, and you can really it's a simple way to kind of create some like 101 level solo. So they may know that. But what they do have, even though they don't know anything about music theory or anything else, is they have incredible groove and incredible rhythm, and audiences eat that stuff up, man. And they've sold millions of albums. And you're saying, how can you do that if you don't know the notes on your instrument? But it comes down to what we connect with on the most fundamental basic level as human beings is rhythm first and foremost. Now, I'm not saying that pitch is not important. It is important. Chords, pitch, music theory, that stuff is important too, but everything lays on the foundation of groove. You can know all the music theory in the world, but if you don't have great rhythm, the ability to play it in time and in a way that feels good for your audience, it negates 99% of it.
That's a really valuable insight. So having identified maybe that weakness in your own skill set and the importance of rhythm and groove from the artists you were playing with and admiring, what did you do? What did you do about it? How did you approach this task of getting better at that?
Yeah, so like the simplest, easiest thing that people can do, and there's definitely more advanced strategies, and I'll share them in a second. But if you are currently not practicing with a metronome, anybody listening to this recording, please do right away. Okay. And if you absolutely hate metronomes, you say the metronome is the devil, right? Then play with a professional level jam track. And that's one of the things we actually have in our premium jazz membership program is we put these professional level jam tracks that make it more fun. So you have the ability to learn rhythm while jamming with other musicians at the same time, right? Bass and drums is more fun, but you have to make sure that you're playing with a consistent timekeeping device, right? And that's going to immediately make you jump up. If you practice every day with a metronome for the rest of your life, your rhythm will 5x, So, because I know that people, a lot of people listen, it's probably, I practiced with the metronome like 10 years ago once. Doesn't that count? Like, no, not enough, please do more than that. So, the other things I did was I started transcribing a lot. Now, the term transcription in jazz, a lot of people think, well, you wrote it out, right? Yes, but it's not the first step. What I'm really doing is in transcription with jazz, we play along with the recordings first, and then later on I'll write it out. But man, if I want to learn groove and I want to learn great rhythm, I'm going to play along with the best of the best. So I start playing along with the Miles Davises, right? I start playing along with Oscar Peterson. I start playing along with Charlie Parker, Wynton Kelly, Herbie Hancock, even my rock guys, Bruce Hornsby, man. I want to learn how he's phrasing his rock stuff. I'll play along with him as well. And inevitably that improved my rhythm as well, right? Now, the last thing that I did, which was really important, was I acknowledged where I was at. I had just not pretending that like it wasn't important. I said, man, I want to learn from people who are better than me. So I started playing with musicians who were better than me, and I wasn't afraid to be the worst guy in the band. I mean, I don't want to be the best. I want to be in situations with people who are better than me, so I could learn from them, right? So I did that as well. I started trying to get gigs where people were better than me, and I worked really hard behind the scenes to make sure that I could hang, right? So inevitably, man, you play with a great drummer, right? They're going to help your time as well, or a musician who's better than you. And then, I guess part B of that is also making sure that you're working with great teachers as well, who also have great rhythm. And that's really important to me. This is why in our Jazz Inner Circle program, which is a private coaching program that we have, every teacher on there has either been Grammy nominated, they have been on at least 50 tours throughout their life, right? They're playing with A-list level players. They've been on platinum recordings. We want to make sure that we're hooking our students up with the best of the best so they can also learn from them as well. So working with great teachers is hugely important as well. So I realize I just dropped a ton of information on your audience. I hope that's what you were looking for there.
Absolutely. I think there were some really valuable recommendations there for a topic that is often just seems a bit fuzzy. People can know they're a bit loose on rhythm or they need to get better at creating a groove, but I think it's often very hard for them to know how to go about that. And I think you just gave a few really great tips for how people can improve that side of things. Yeah.
So for everybody listening to this right now, please make your audience happy, make me happy, make Chris happy, make yourself happy, work on your rhythm. You will not regret it.
So you touched on there the kind of range of expert tutors you have contributing at freejazzlessons.com. And I wanted to talk a little bit about a couple of your products, your courses there. One is, we touched on one already, the Zero to Jazz Piano Hero course. But the two I wanted to talk about now were your most recent release, which is the Jazz Improvisation Super System. And I believe that's a collaboration with a world-leading artist. Is that right?
Yeah. So what that is an A to Z jazz improvisation course. And what I did was, so just from my years of touring, I feel like I'm sort of the conduit or the bridge between the students, right? people out there who are really serious about music. They want to get better. They don't have 20 hours a day to practice. And then the people who are out there professionally playing this stuff on a high level, because I have always been a gigger. I've been out there touring for years myself, but I'm also really passionate about education. And so I've just met so many great players over the years, in my years of being on the scene and on tours, just people who just absolutely blow your mind when they sit down at their instrument, right? Like, I love their playing. So I wanted to start bringing more of those type of players in and helping the students be able to learn from them as well, but also getting that information in a step-by-step way and in the special way that we do it at freejazzlessons.com. So I'm sort of that bridge in between. And one of my favorite players that I've ever heard play, he's just a genius improviser, is a man by the name of David Garfield. And a lot of your listeners will probably know David. He is the musical director for George Benson. He's been on hundreds of recordings. He's been on, he's a top LA studio musician. David Sanborn. He's played with Natalie Cole, Freddie Hubbard. If you have any rock fans out there, he's played with Boss Skaggs, Eddie Van Halen for your, 80s shred guitar fans out there, right? He's played with so many people. Manhattan Transfer. The list goes on. And I just truly love the way that David plays piano. And so what we did is we flew David into our studio and we filmed a course together, and we documented his whole improvisation approach, his method of how he improvises over a variety of chords, chord progressions, how he thinks about things, how he comes up with licks, how he solves musical situations, and how he improvises over great jazz standards. The cool thing about this program is that he teaches it in a way that you can also apply this information to other instruments. So it's not just a piano-based course. And then he also teaches it in a way where you can apply the same information if you're playing other styles of music, blues and rock. He teaches it in this special way. So, and that's really the goal of all our programs, Chris, is just to make sure that, that people can take this one skill and apply it to 1,000 different areas. So we're really proud of that course. It's actually been we just released it October 2nd of 2017. And I'm floored by this, but it's our best-selling course so far of this whole year. People have gobbled it up. They really are enjoying it. So it's pretty exciting.
Wow. Well, I think there's one really remarkable thing about it from what I've seen, and that is, I think it's easy to hear a description of an A to Z jazz course like that and think, okay, there's going to be lesson after lesson, and maybe by the end of it, I'll become a pretty decent jazz musician. But you've been sharing these great preview videos with little excerpts from the course, and they really hammer home how just a simple concept can really have an immediate and quite dramatic impact on how you approach jazz or how you approach improvising. And, one that stood out to me was about the Mixolydian scale and how you can relate scales to chords in your improvising. Could you share a little bit about that with the audience?
Yeah, absolutely. So check this out. All right. For those of the audience who do not know what a Mixolydian scale is. So Mixolydian is simply just a major scale, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So if we're in the key of C, it would be C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, right? Simple major scale. And it's the same formula except for one note is different. Okay. The 7th note of this scale is flat. Okay. So it's a C, D, E, F, G, A, B flat. It's supposed to be natural. See, and you can apply that same pattern. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, flat 7, and then 1 again. That's your octave. So this is a scale that you can use, and there's lots of scales, but it's one of the simple scales that you can play over a dominant 7th chord, right? Now, inside each scale, no matter what scale you're in, there's a variety of chords that you can access inside each scale. So, we talked about the C Mixolydian scale. Well, inside there's a C chord, C, E, G. There's also the notes D, F, A inside that chord as well, which is a D minor chord. So you can start going through these different scales and you can start building melodies with chords, with little arpeggios just from the scale itself. So you're sort of painting different chord progressions on top of one chord. It's really, really beautiful sound. It's super fun, and you'll hear so many great players do this in their improvisation. People like I mentioned Bruce Hornsby earlier, right? Barry Harris, Chick Corea does stuff like this, right? You'll hear people like Bud Powell do things like this. The list goes on, and Miles Davis and John Coltrane. It's a vertical modal way of improvising. And I don't want to get too ahead of your audience just in case, they're not super advanced. But the simple takeaway there is there's lots of cool chord stuff you can get from one scale. And David David and I, we really break down all these little cool nuggets you can get from scales and chords and things like that in the course.
We'll definitely put a link in the show notes to the page where you share those preview videos, and I'd recommend anyone listening to go and check out that one and actually hear it in practice, because it's such a powerful idea. It's simple enough, but a lot of people wouldn't think that they're kind of allowed to play different chords over the current chord in the progression. And once you hear how it works, it immediately makes sense, and you can see how you could use that in your improv. You had another one too about playing outside of the chord progression that again was just that kind of light bulb insight that would let anyone quite quickly improve their improvisation. So yeah, we'll have a link to that in the show notes, and definitely go check out those previews and see if the course might be useful for you. The other course I really wanted to touch on, just because it is December time and a lot of people, musicians of all stripes, but I think probably pianists in particular, are going to be called on to play some Christmas music sometime soon. And you have a dedicated course to help people play Christmas traditional music in a jazz style. I'd love if you could just share some insights on what makes the difference between kind of traditional Christmas hymns and carols and approaching it with a jazz mindset, and how you teach it in that course.
Yeah, absolutely. So the name of the course is the Christmas Jazz Piano Super System. And the reason why I developed this course is, again, gigging musician and, out there. And for those of you guys who are not professionals, but oftentimes in late November and early December, especially if you're a guitar player or a piano player, like you're out there doing like Christmas gigs like crazy. People want to hear Christmas music. And, I pay attention to the audience. I want to see what they're reacting to. And early on in my career, I'd get sort of these, Christmas fake books, and I just sort of play the tunes fairly straight. And I noticed that people were like, polite golf clap, and, they liked it okay, but it wasn't really that interesting because they'd heard the same darn arrangements. If you're in your 40s or in your 30s, you've heard these arrangements that everybody's playing with the same chords for 25 years, and you're not really getting people's attention, right? So, as musicians, we want to do stuff that's fun and interesting. And of course, we want to, do stuff that people relate and enjoy. So the next year I was like, I got to do something about this. I got to start like doing some reharmonizations. Let's put some cool chords in there. Let's do some things that are going to catch people's attention. So I started, kind of mapping out some different chords and ideas and putting in some jazz rhythms and syncopations and things like that. And all of a sudden people were like coming up to me and standing around the piano. And I said, okay, I think I got something here. Like apparently this is resonating with people out there. So what I ended up doing was I started building out a bunch of different arrangements of these classic Christmas hymns. And so that's what this course is. I just documented the chords, all the different arrangement techniques, the syncopations, the different concepts that I'm using to take just, bland Christmas chord changes and Christmas tunes and make them more exciting in a jazz style of music. And so, not only do you get sheet music and everything's written down, but I'm breaking down step by step all the chords. I'm showing you the voicings, the rhythms. I'm always going to show people example performances of what I'm doing so that if they're more ear players, they can watch and press rewind on the video and see me doing it at half speed, right? But I also want to let you know what I'm doing. It's not just like, here you go, play this chord, don't ask any questions, like that's not teaching, right? You want to make sure that you're making people a better musician through studying the stuff that you're doing. So that's what this program is. We go step by step through all these different Christmas classics, and it's a double disc course. I'm extremely proud of it. And I think we launched that in 2014, 2015. It's sort of what we call an evergreen course. It's sort of timeless, and every year we sell a bunch of copies of that as well. So thanks for asking about that.
Cool. Well, I definitely recommend our listeners to go check that out if they want to spice up their Christmas playing this year.
Yeah, and I forgot to mention, you can actually get a copy of that course at freejazzlessons.com/Christmas.
Awesome. Well, we will have a link to that and everything else we've talked about in the show notes for this episode. Thank you so much for joining us today, Steve. It's been a real pleasure.
Chris, it is truly my pleasure. Thank you, everybody who stuck around and listened to my story, and hope you got some value out of it. And I really appreciate you spending the time with us.
The Musicality Podcast is brought to you by Musical U. Learn more at musical-u.com.
That was a conversation packed with juicy nuggets of wisdom. I tried to keep these summary segments short, but there was a lot there that's worth recapping. Steve learned music from childhood, and he discovered his passion for jazz early on. He went on to study at the renowned Berklee College of Music and became a world-touring jazz pianist. Although that may seem like the story of someone who was blessed with a talent for music, Steve explained that it was not an easy, straight-line journey of success. And for him, talent and hard work are inseparable. It doesn't matter to him how much talent he or his students have. That is just the starting point, and it's hard work and the right kind of learning that leads to success in music. I wanted to get Steve's perspective on a few key questions about jazz, and it was really enlightening to hear his answers. Despite its reputation and the intimidation some music students might feel, Steve feels strongly that jazz is not an advanced genre, and you can absolutely start learning jazz from the beginning of your musical training. There are particular areas you'll want to focus on, and with the right course or teacher, it doesn't have to be overwhelming or excessively challenging, as demonstrated by his own Zero to Jazz Piano Hero course, which he says can get anyone playing the jazz music they love in just 30 to 60 days. I asked Steve about the relative importance of music theory and ear training when it comes to improvisation, and I loved his answer. He shared his philosophy on improvisation, which is very much grounded in the spiritual, creative nature of expressing your musical ideas through improv. And so the music theory and the ear training are just ways to enable you to bring that out through your instrument. Both are valuable and both are effective, but they are both just a means to an end, which is free and creative expression of your own musical identity. Some musicians worry that learning the theory will constrain their creativity, but Steve says it's just the opposite. The famous musicians who didn't know any music theory are the exception to the rule. And what's more, Steve believes they do all in fact have solid music theory understanding, even if they're using their own mental models and words for what's going on, rather than the traditional formal music theory. One thing that can set an incredible musician apart from a just okay one is their sense of rhythm. And it was terrific to hear Steve's own journey and the realization that he had been really neglecting this area. Although he had been practicing hard and putting in the hours, it wasn't until he started gigging regularly and putting himself among musicians better than him that he realized his rhythm skills really needed work. Steve shared 3 great tips for improving your own sense of rhythm. The first one is simple: play with a metronome. Many musicians think that metronomes are just for beginners, and once you have an okay ability to keep the beat, you can cast it aside. But Steve points out the huge value and impact that consistently and continually practicing with a metronome can have on your rhythm skills and your groove. And if you find the metronome too boring, you can use professional quality backing tracks the way they do in his Inner Circle program. The second tip is to play along with the musicians you admire who have fantastic groove. This can be part of the process of transcribing, writing down music by ear, which is a great activity in itself. But for Steve, it was the playing along with the jazz greats that let him really dial in his own sense of the groove. The third tip was to play with people better than you. Don't coast along being the best musician in the room. Instead, put yourself in situations where you can learn from others and you are forced to level up your own skills. That will have a big positive impact on your sense of rhythm, among other things. We talked about his new jazz improvisation super system, developed with David Garfield, which provides A to Z training in jazz improv, not just for piano, but in a way that can help any instrumentalist. And I think what's perhaps most important to know is that this is a course packed with insights and ideas that can have a near immediate impact on your improvisation skills. I highlighted one example from the course which Steve was kind enough to explain. How if you're soloing using the Mixolydian scale over a single chord, you can actually create your own musical motion and interest by drawing out the chords that are present in that scale. It's a super simple idea, but it immediately gives you a new and effective way to upgrade your improvising with the same scale you might already be using. I'd really recommend checking out the short video demonstrating this on Steve's site. We'll have a direct link to that in the show notes. And you might also like to listen to our recent episode on finding chords in scales right here on the Musicality podcast. Now, this episode is coming out in December, and that means Christmas time is approaching, and many musicians will be slightly dreading churning out the same tired repertoire of Christmas songs. So I asked Steve to share some ideas from his Christmas jazz piano supersystem on how you can spice up those same songs with syncopation, new harmony, and melodic decorations that give a fresh new feel to the old classics and wow your audience. I loved having the chance to chat with Steve, and I hope you'll take some of these ideas about improvisation, rhythm skills, or approaching learning jazz to your own musical life. And if you want to know more about Steve's courses and his coaching, please head over to freejazzlessons.com. Thanks for listening to this episode. Stay tuned for our next one, where we'll talk about something Steve recommended, transcribing music. What it means, why to do it, and how to get started.
Thank you for listening to the Musicality Podcast. This episode has ended, but your musical journey continues. Head over to musicalitypodcast.com, where you will find the links and resources mentioned in this episode, as well as bonus content exclusive for podcast listeners. That's music.